So this is podcast 5 of my Prologue is Amazing podcast. And I was coding a bit in Prologue, and I wanted to talk about how the application I'm trying to build, and you know how I'm gonna build it. So the application is it's kind of it's kind of the political system in a sense. I realized, right? Like, so you want to create bills, like proposals for something, right? Like the proposals, like new laws, right? So it's like schools should close at 12 p.m., right? In a certain city, for example. So somebody would come along, a user of the system, and say, I think schools should close at 12 p.m. Then other people might come along and say, okay, well, how this politician or these set of politicians could make it happen if they voted in Congress or Parliament, right? And then people could come along and say, okay, I'm willing to donate $100 to this proposal, and other people come along and 100 and whatever, $10, $1. So, and then the money would be divided between the proposed politicians, right? And then the politicians would be like, oh, okay, if we pass this proposal, bill, law, whatever it's called, then we'll receive that money, right? So my system would dispose the money to them once it happens. Okay, now, so it's like a system for passing laws and for people to get together and pass the laws and donate money towards passing the laws, and wherever that will be worked out. Maybe it's illegal to send money directly to the politicians, right? Maybe that's considered corruption. So maybe there would be other mechanisms, right? Maybe like political action committees, PACs, would be the ones receiving the money, and the politician would be like, well, I'd like this PAC to receive that money, right? And those PACs would do things like maybe advertising for the politician's next campaign, things like that. So that's the basic sense of the system. And then I actually realized it's a lot like, it's a bit like how software, version control systems like Git, right? So, like during the course of this thing, there might be amendments, but I thought maybe I should not do that, or like, yeah, something like that might have to happen. Now, also there will be discussions, right? So my system has to allow for discussions on the proposed bill. Like maybe people need to argue over it, and then the politician needs to see the argument or whatever, or he could be like, they could be like, well, we're willing to do it if this aspect of this is changed, or maybe the people donating money would be like, well, if this aspect of the thing will change, then we'll donate money, right? So there's all kinds of things involved. So initially, I thought of doing it as an entity relationship system, right? Like a relational database kind of system. Like you start off with, these are the entities in the system, and this is this, and this is this. And then I started realizing, you know what, I should just go full bore on schemaless possibility of Prologue, right? So in a relational database, you define your tables and the relationships between them first, and what the particular columns, what their types are, and how the foreign key relationships between the tables, etc. Then I started realizing I have Prologue, and I don't need to do that way. So instead, I was like, I would simply add things, or in text even, right? So somebody could be like, well, I want to be added to this system. So that's a thing. I want this bill I agree with, or this bill I don't agree with, or this is a better bill than this one. I propose this bill as an amendment to this bill. I want to donate money to this if this aspect is changed. Right? So there's all kinds of queries and updates to the system, right? There's all kinds of information that can go into the system, right? And so I was like, just use Prolog to translate those into something, and then kind of link, instead of like deciding on initial entities and what they're called, just have all this go in, and then start, adding rules to, formalize that, right? So let's say, some person would be like, add me to the system. Another person would be like, add my username to the system. Add this username to the system. Now, instead of initially, like, my system would just have those added into the system as part of the system, right? And then there would be a rule. It's like, oh, saying that add me to the system is the same thing as saying add my username to the system, right? Now I'm talking in terms of English, but maybe it doesn't have to be English. Maybe there will be actual predicates or functions that just have different names when you're adding them. But later on, eventually, I'd figure out, like, I'd add rules to link all that stuff up, right? So it's post hoc analysis of the thing rather than predefined or pre-structured, right? Before adding anything to the system, you have to get the right thing into the system. In this system, stuff will just be added without constraint, and then the analysis would be done to figure out what information has been added to the system. So it would be really relying on the strengths of Prolog for data analysis. Right? The reason I thought this is, like, I want to be as dumb as possible when I'm building this, right? So I can just add lots of stuff, queries or whatever, statements, and then, I start building queries on this data and creating reports, and then I look at the report and see maybe, like, this is this, and maybe I want to make right, like, I'll be like, what projects have been proposed? And there's a report that comes out, and I look at it. Then I'm like, okay, maybe I want to change this project, or I want to vote for this project, or I want to add a potential politician that should be involved in this project, etc. Right? So as I look at the reports, I can be like, this is a statement I can make towards the system. So I just repeat that, rinse and repeat over and over. That would be my software methodology, right? So just add stuff, try to create reports out of it, and add more stuff, right? And then there's the problem of, it's like, I've added statements, but maybe I haven't analyzed some statements. So I would have Prolog queries. It's like, I've dealt with all these statements, but I haven't dealt with all these statements, right? Like these other statements. And so create reports from that until I have reports for every single statement added to the system. And then rinse, repeat that, right? So, and then, like, I'm always dealing with everything. Like, I'll always exhaustively analyzed every statement that's gone into the system, and try to think of what I, as a user, would want to add more statements to the system based on these previous statements, right? So that's how my system would be developed. And then I even realized it's like, what I can have is information goes into the system, and then all the reports are generated as static pages. And then users just look at the static pages, and then they can add, more information to the system by clicking on static pages, and then that sends a little more information to the dynamic database, that is the Prolog system, and it continually regenerates all the static pages, right? But and then maybe start making it efficient so only some of the pages are regenerated every time a user enters a new query. So I think that's the best way to develop the system. And I might even, like, there's the problem of like what to call procedures, what to call the things in the system. And in this system, I might not even have to do that. I might be just like adding statements in English to it, have Prolog deconstruct the English statement to create new facts for the system. And so all of that remains in there, so I don't have to think even too much about, right? Because deciding what to call the thing that the user is asking the system becomes a harder problem, right? Like, what do I call this thing? So I just have it go in as English, and then create, analyze all of that. And then this is like a whole kind of new way of software development. It's almost like there's a bunch of people, they send in written requests to a system, the system gives back a book or a pamphlet or a report, right? The users read the report, and then they give a whole set of new statements they want to make back to the system, and rinse and repeat over and over again. And all this without me having to carefully plan some kind of entities and relationships in the system, or carefully think out anything in the system. Is just like look like turn it into an information extraction system, right? So my system is basically information extraction, and then over and over that is done. And then I'm thinking it's like I could develop more system. Once this is done, I would use the same methodology to maybe create more web applications in this way.